Number 1.
On Tuesday, May 13, 2008, Brandon Swanson, 19, of Marshall, Minnesota, visited with friends and had a few drinks in nearby Lind. The teen completed his first year of college at Minnesota West Community and Technical College that day. Between 10:30 and 11 p.m., Brandon left the celebration and drove to another friend's house in Canby to say goodbye to a classmate. Brandon did not appear to be intoxicated, according to his friends at the Lind party. Witnesses at the Canby party said he had an additional shot of whiskey but left sometime after midnight to head back to Marshall. Highway 68 is a direct route from Canby to Marshall with an approximate 30-minute driving time. Around 1:15 a.m. May 14, Brandon got his car hung up in a ditch along a gravel road. He attempted to call his friends for help but nobody answered. Around 1:54 a.m. Brandon called his parents, Brian and Annette Swanson, and informed them about his situation and that he needed a ride. He said he was between Marshall and Lind and gave his location. He also said he was not injured from the accident. His parents drove to pick up their son. When they arrived at the location Brandon gave, they could not find him. Annette called him on his cell phone and they both agreed to flash their lights to let each other know they were there. She could hear Brandon flashing the car lights and at one point she kept saying, "We're flashing our lights. We're flashing our lights." His response to her was, "Don't you see me?" They never saw him. Frustrated, Brandon hung up on his mom, but Annette quickly called him back apologizing for getting frustrated herself. He told her he could see Lind's town lights and he was going to walk towards town. Brandon said to meet him at a Lind Tavern parking lot. While driving, Brian and Brandon talked via their cell phones. Brandon explained to Brian that he was going to cut through fields so it would be quicker. Along the way, he walked on gravel roads, saw 2 fence lines, and heard running water. The call lasted about 47 minutes when all of a sudden Brandon yelled, "OSH," and the call was disconnected. His father said it sounded like Brandon slipped and fell. Numerous attempts to reach Brandon's phone were unsuccessful. The phone rang each time it was called until the next day when calls went straight to voicemail. Brandon has not had any communication with his parents since. At 6:30 a.m., Brandon's parents called police to report him missing. Police told them to wait a while because it wasn't unheard of for young males to go off the grid for a bit. However, later that day cell phone records showed Brandon was near Porter, Minnesota, not Lind, when he phoned his parents. Porter sits between Canby and Marshall along Highway 68. A search began and around 12:30 p.m., Brandon's Chevrolet Lumina sedan was found about a mile and a half north of Taunton, right on the border between Lincoln, Yellow Medicine, and Lyon counties. There was no physical damage to the vehicle or evidence of bodily injury. It was off the side of a field approach, and the vehicle was hung up, Lincoln County Sheriff Jack Vizicki told CNN. It's sort of a sharp incline, nothing major, but enough that the car would get hung up so the wheels are too high off the ground to get any traction. Wheat 2010, over the months following Brandon's disappearance, volunteers, emergency personnel and law enforcement utilized walkers, boats, horseback, and all-terrain vehicles to search areas of Lincoln, Lyon and Yellow Medicine counties and bodies of water including Yellow Medicine River. The authorities believed that Brandon fell into a body of water and drowned. However, search dogs followed his scent to the river's edge but continued walking on. This suggested that Brandon probably fell into the water, managed to get out, and continued walking. The temperature that night was around 39 degrees, so Brandon may have succumbed to hypothermia. Search dogs picked up the scent of human remains a few times, specifically in an area north of Porter near Mud Creek, but no body has ever been found. Police do not have any evidence of foul play and believe Brandon's remains are within the 122 square mile search area. On the 10-year anniversary of Brandon's disappearance, Yellow Medicine County Sheriff Bill Flated told the Marshall Independent, "It's a huge area. If you take that immediate area where the car was and then the time frame when he was talking on the phone with his parents, who knows what direction he went and how far he traveled." Kirk 2018, established by Brian and Annette Swanson and sponsored by House Minority Leader Marty Seifert, R. Marshall, and Senator Dennis Frederickson, R. New Ulm. Brandon's law was signed by Minnesota's Governor Tim Pawlenty on May 7, 2009. It took effect almost 2 months later on July 1. The law will require law enforcement to take a missing persons report without delay after notification of someone missing under dangerous circumstances, no matter the missing person's age, immediately conduct a preliminary investigation to determine if the person is missing and whether the person is endangered, and promptly notify all other law enforcement agencies of the situation. It clarifies that the agency taking the report be the lead agency in the investigation, Brandon's Law.
Number 2.
It is one of America's most enduring mysteries, troubling investigators for decades and inspiring Hollywood cinema. Now a letter has emerged which appears to shed light on the fate of 3 prisoners who escaped from Alcatraz in 1962. Authorities have never determined whether brothers John and Clarence Anglin and fellow inmate Frank Morris survived the daring jailbreak. The FBI closed its case in 1979, concluding the men were unlikely to have survived the 1.5-mile journey across San Francisco Bay's frigid waters from the island prison to the mainland. But no conclusive evidence of the prisoners' deaths has ever been found, and the U.S. Marshals Service continues to investigate their disappearance to this day. A letter has now come to light that claims the trio of bank robbers survived their perilous escape and lived into old age. "My name is John Anglin," the handwritten missive begins. "I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962. Yes, we all made it that night, but barely." Anglin's cell is now a highlight for tourists who can see the ventilation shaft he squeezed through with his fellow escapees before they floated off from Alcatraz in raft made of raincoats inflated with a concertina. They had spent 6 months beforehand carving holes with sharpened spoons and stolen saws to crawl into a network of pipes and plumbing so they could evade guards. The fugitives were never seen again, and the FBI said they were likely to have drowned. However, according to the letter, Morris lived until 2005 and Clarence Anglin died in 2008. The letter was sent to San Francisco Police Department in 2013 but was not publicly disclosed by the force. The document has come to light 5 years later after it was obtained by local TV station KPIX5. The letter's writer says he spent years living in Seattle following his escape before moving to North Dakota and Southern California. The letter was passed to an FBI laboratory to be examined for fingerprints, DNA and handwriting. But the results provided few answers. Handwriting samples of all 3 escapees, John Anglin, Clarence Anglin and Frank Morris, were compared to the anonymous letter, and the results were deemed inconclusive, said a statement from the U.S. Marshals Service. The escapees' family are also undecided about the letter's authenticity. "I really haven't come to a conclusion whether I believe that it's John reaching out or not," said the Anglin brothers' nephew, David Widner. But he said he thought his uncles could still be alive, revealing that his grandmother received roses with a card signed with their names for several years after their escape. "It's always been talked about through the family," added Mr. Widner. He also criticized authorities, who never contacted his family about the letter. "For him to say he had cancer and was dying, I feel like they should have at least reached out to the family and let them know it existed," he said. The 3 inmates remain on the U.S. Marshals Service watch list, along with photos of what they may look like today. Their breakout was immortalized in the 1979 film Escape from Alcatraz, starring Clint Eastwood as Morris. Alcatraz was shut down in 1963, a year after the famous escape. Although authorities at the time insisted deadly currents meant no one could survive the swim from Alcatraz to the San Francisco shoreline, the route is now regularly tackled by triathletes.
Number 3.
A longtime suspect in the 1996 murder of JonBenét Ramsey in Boulder, Colorado, has allegedly confessed to accidentally killing the 6-year-old in a series of letters sent to a former high school classmate, according to the Daily Mail. Gary Oliva, 54, is a convicted pedophile currently serving a 10-year sentence in Colorado for possession of child pornography, but is up for parole in 2020. "I never loved anyone like I did JonBenét, and yet I let her slip and her head bashed in half, and I watched her die," Oliva wrote in a letter to his former classmate, Michael Vale. "It was an accident. Please believe me. She was not like the other kids." In another letter to Vale, Oliva wrote, "JonBenét completely changed me and removed all evil from me. Just one look at her beautiful face, her glowing beautiful skin, and her divine God body, I realized I was wrong to kill other kids. Yet by accident she died and it was my fault." Vale has suspected his old high school buddy killed JonBenét for the last 22 years, ever since he received a disturbing phone call from Oliva shortly after the murder and before the case made national headlines. "My suspicions began when Gary called me late at night on December 26, 1996." Vale, who lives in Ventura, California, told the Daily Mail. "He was sobbing and said, 'I heard a little girl.' I tried to get more information out of him. The only other thing he told me was that he was in the Boulder, Colorado area. On December 27 I read on the front page of my local newspaper Girl 6, slain in Boulder, Colorado. I immediately called the Boulder Police Department and told them what I knew about Gary and what he had told me just days earlier. They didn't get back to me. 3 months later I called the police again to find out what was going on in its investigation of Gary, but instead I was sent to a police answering machine set up for tips on the JonBenét case. I left a message on the recorded line, and again I never heard back from investigators. Back in 1996, Oliva was a registered sex offender whose listed address was not far from the Ramsey home, and he reportedly attended a candlelight vigil shortly after JonBenét's murder. But despite receiving several tips from Vail, Boulder police didn't consider Oliva a suspect until 2000, when he was arrested on unrelated charges, and police found a photo of JonBenét, a poem he'd written titled Ode to JonBenét, and a stun gun among his possessions. Several investigators, including Lou Smith, a retired homicide detective hired by the Boulder district attorney, had theorized that a stun gun may have been used to subdue JonBenét the night of the murder. Boulder police investigators lost interest in Oliva when new DNA testing methods failed to match his DNA to the crime scene evidence, but the department has since acknowledged that the crime scene was mishandled. In 2002, Smith, who has since passed away, told 48 Hours that he still considered Oliva a suspect. So did Vail, who told the Daily Mail that Boulder police have placed too much emphasis on DNA matches when it's well known that the crime scene and evidence in the case was compromised. Haunted by Oliva's tearful phone call, Vail has maintained contact with him for years in hopes of eliciting a confession. "I've continued this for decades now, even with him being in prison," Vail said. "But he has only just admitted to killing her. He believes he will go to hell if he doesn't admit to it. I have now sent these letters to Boulder police in the hope it will get Gary to provide them with firm proof and to name who else may have been involved in JonBenét's death. Now they have this, a written confession. The police need to charge him with her murder." Oliva has been behind bars in Colorado since 2016, when he was arrested by Boulder police on child porn charges, and according to the Daily Mail, Oliva may have even taken responsibility for JonBenét's murder. "I pleaded guilty to the murder of JonBenét, as well as countless charges of assaults and sexual abuse against many children," Oliva wrote in a recent letter to Vail, according to the Daily Mail. "There were various agreements made by me and the court which I signed many pages. While there is no such plea on the record, the arrest affidavit, while redacted, very likely alludes to Oliva's longtime, ongoing obsession with JonBenét." According to the affidavit, obtained by the Daily Mail, investigators found on Oliva's phone approximately 335 photos that had something to do with redacted. Some were regular photographs of her, likely found online, the affidavit continues. Of those photographs, 19 were images from redacted autopsy, likely from the photographs that had been leaked to the press in years past. There were also many photographs of what appear to be shrines to redacted. It is unknown where these shrines are located or if they were created by Oliva or not. I observed in the contact section of Oliva's phone, there were many references to redacted. In the video section of the phone, I found several videos that were tributes to redacted as well. On Thursday, January 10, the Boulder Police Department issued a statement to the media and on its website, seemingly in response to the Daily Mail's story. The Boulder Police Department is aware of Gary Oliva and has investigated his potential involvement in this case, including several previous confessions, the statement reads. The department routinely receives information on this investigation. Information provided to the police department is reviewed, along with the many tips and theories we receive. There are no new updates in this investigation, and the department will not comment further.
Number 4.
The victims all died horribly raped, beaten or sliced, and tossed nude into trash cans or empty lots. Some were simply shot while pleading for their lives. Decades have slipped by with no arrests and no real hope of resolution for their loved ones. Until now. The stunning success of DNA research in the Golden State Killer case, leading to the arrest of a suspect after decades of no progress, has electrified homicide investigators throughout the Bay Area, with new hope that maybe they, too, can get new leads into old homicides with warehoused DNA evidence. Some 1970s cases stand out in particular for their similarity in depravity, timing and volume to the long Golden State saga of rapes and slayings, including the grisly Santa Rosa Hitchhiker murders, the Doodler slayings in San Francisco's gay haunts, and the killings of 6 women in and around the city's Sunnydale housing project. The assumption is that with hundreds of unsolved killings throughout the region, only about half of all killings usually get solved. There must be among them long-time, unusually vexing cases that could be ripe for DNA hits. There was 25-year-old Tommy Wenger, whose body was chopped up in 1994 and thrown into a dumpster near Polk Street. The plastic trash bags he was found in, still stored as evidence, could have usable samples. There was Jenny Lo Chang, 19, Bludgeoned to death at San Francisco State University in 1977 is the campus's first killing. The ashtray used to bash in her head could also have usable samples. Even evidence in the infamous Zodiac killer spree that left 5 people shot or stabbed to death in 1968 and 1969, as he sent taunting letters and cryptograms to the Chronicle, is getting new inspection by investigators in San Francisco and other local areas where he left victims. The DNA in the case is so tenuous that it had long been considered largely useless, but the Vallejo Police Department has sent 2 envelopes with stamps to a lab for updated testing. With the new realization that technology for more accurately sorting out genetic code has advanced in recent years and that enough DNA samples are in databases all over the nation through genealogical sites, there is hope that links can be more easily made. There is a tint of caution around that hope, however, with growing privacy concerns that also followed revelations of the Golden State Killer bust. Genealogical blogs have been lighting up with concerns from people wondering if they should delete their genetic profiles or mark them just for private research. The idea of loading DNA into a database, they say, is to recreationally find relatives and research family history, not to serve as a search engine for police. It's a Pandora's box, said Pam Dixon, executive director of the World Privacy Forum. Once you open it, the consequences come. For now, though, the gumshoes are plunging ahead. In Santa Rosa, the boxes of homicide tools and rape kits scraped from the Santa Rosa Hitchhiker murders scenes have been hauled out for a fresh look. Victims' pictures are up on the walls and potential genetic material is being evaluated, said Sonoma County Sheriff's Lieutenant Tim Duke. You never give up on these cases, but the fact there have been some new breaks in the technology and techniques around DNA is exciting, said Duke, who is on the team that reopened the case a couple of months ago. We had the Hitchhikers case shelved for a while, but now we're strongly working it again. We came across some evidence we thought was good enough to send out for testing. We're hoping for the best. Ken Moses, 72, worked at the San Francisco Police Crime Laboratory from 1971 to 1997 and established a crime scene investigations unit there in 1983. He now works as an independent consultant. The DNA situation has been very dramatic, he said. In the past, it was limited to violent crimes that had biological fluid, and maybe 2% of crimes had that. But the technologies for developing DNA have changed. Now you can get DNA from a discarded cigarette butt or something that someone has brushed their fingers against. Armed with such advances, cold case sleuths go through the file, push the dust off, look to see what evidence is available, and see what property was booked, Moses said. The problem is a lot of this stuff wasn't booked, and if it was, it's in lousy condition or wet. But once they find it, it's a normal request to the lab who will do the extractions. The new developments, he said, have certainly made the job more exciting and productive, and it's only getting more and more exciting. The Golden State Killer committed at least 12 homicides and 45 rapes in California from 1976 to 86, and decades went by with no true leads until investigators ran DNA samples from crime scene evidence through a genealogical website and got a hit leading to Joseph James DeAngelo. After filling in locations, times, descriptions and other clues pointing to their suspect, detectives arrested the 72-year-old former cop last month at his home in a quiet Sacramento suburb. Prosecutors are now assembling cases up and down the state to take him to trial. Clifford Moss, the boyfriend of one of the victims in the Santa Rosa Hitchhiker murders, lives a few miles from DeAngelo's house, and when the suspect was arrested, he was filled with a mixture of the dreaded dredged up and renewed hope. Moss, now 66, lived in Sacramento County during the Golden State Killer's crime spree years, fearing for his and his wife's lives. When he learned his near neighbor was the suspect, Moss's memory immediately shot back to the Golden State Killer-like homicide that shook his life to the core in March 1972. That's when investigators found the naked body of his then-girlfriend, 19-year-old college student Kim Allen, in a creek 8 miles south of Santa Rosa. She had been raped and strangled, and she would be the third of 7 female victims in what would become known as the Hitchhiker murders. Moss is long married with a career at the State Department of Education and has 3 children and 3 grandchildren, but the shock and sorrow of Allen's death still plays in my head in times like this, he said. That was a long time ago, but the pain never ends. This new DNA stuff? It's about damn time. I hope they can do something. There's never closure, but I think everyone would feel a little better if they caught someone. The DNA evidence collected from Allen's body is considered among the strongest potential leads in the case. Investigators in 2011 were attempting to test it and other samples for possible links to the notorious Ted Bundy, who was in the area around the time of the killings and was eventually executed for other killings, but that process stalled. It's not stalled anymore. Deborah Silva has extensively researched the slayings since 1990 when she lived near the spot on France Valley Road where 3 victims were found. So many ghoulish homicide tourists knocked on her door wanting to see where the bodies were dumped that she started looking up the history, and I came to really care for all these girls. If these new DNA techniques really work out, it could be the break they're looking for, said Silva, 66. The person or persons who did the murders need to pay for what they did. And if they're dead, maybe it would be unfortunate for the remaining family, but it might be a real light bulb moment for them and for everyone else. That light bulb moment is rare. According to the nonprofit Murder Accountability Project, there were 112,762 homicides in California between 1980 and 2012, but only 65,864 of them have been solved. That clocks in at a 58% clearance rate. Among them, practically lost to the mists of time, are a string of killings from 1974 to 1975, in which a serial killer dubbed the Doodler targeted San Francisco's gay community and stabbed at least 14 men to death. Another forgotten wave of killings involved the 6 women who were raped and slain in and around the city's Sunnydale housing project between 1973 and 1976. The city's detectives are sorting through old, unsolved homicide files to see what's worth sending to DNA labs. It's a painstaking task. As with most big city departments, there are hundreds of files to sift through. We're still putting together all the various pieces in the Doodler case to see where it's at, said San Francisco Cold Case Police Inspector Dan Cunningham, who'd been dredging that mystery hard even before D'Angelo was nabbed. There are things in 2018, with our modern technology and methods, that people think are important that weren't thought to be important in 1975 or 1976. San Francisco investigators would also like to put to rest the cases of Tommy Wenger and Jenny Lo Chang, whose families have never given up hope of an arrest. Chang's family has hired a private investigator who checks in on the case periodically, and Wenger's mother calls the homicide department every January around his birthday for an update. Her boy was a street hustler who smoked crack and was chopped to death at 25, but in her heart, he is always the sweet-natured, soft-spoken boy who would have gotten his life back on track if he'd been given the chance. The DNA in Tommy's case, they've told me they have hope for that, for what they have on the bags he got put into, said Carol Yost, who lives in Pennsylvania. I'm hopeful about this new DNA thing. It's a good possibility. Finding out who killed my boy would give me some peace.
Number 5.
It's been more than 2 years since the Delphi murders, when the bodies of Indiana teens Liberty German, 14, and Abigail Williams, 13, were discovered near a wooded creek. The deaths of Abby and Libby horrified people in Indiana and around the world. They were shocked and heartbroken when the girls' bodies were found by a search party in the woods just east of Delphi on February 14, 2017. Since then, people have been transfixed by the case, following the latest news and hoping for any sign of an arrest. The emotional toll on the Delphi community has been overwhelming. But, so far, no arrests have been made. Abby and Libby went missing a year ago on February 13, 2017, when they were dropped off at about 1 p.m. on a day off from school to go walking along the Delphi historic trails in Carroll County. They had planned to meet up with a family member later in the day. The 2 8th graders posted several photos of themselves on Facebook while crossing the scenic Monon High Bridge the afternoon they disappeared. Their bodies were found about 24 hours later near Deer Creek, a half-mile east of the bridge. Autopsies were conducted, but neither the coroner nor the Delphi Police, Carroll County Sheriff's Office, Indiana State Police, or FBI have released any significant details about how the teens died. Key evidence in the case. There have been 30,000 leads in the case, with each one investigated by police, according to State Police Superintendent Doug Carter. In a news conference at the Monon High Bridge trailhead, Carter said investigators still want to hear tips. However, he cautioned people not to post theories or photos on social media because it could complicate efforts to solve the case. Even though no arrests have been made, Carter said he believes we're one piece of the puzzle away from figuring out who this individual is. Somebody out there knows who this person is, he said. I don't think there's multiple pieces of the puzzle. I think there's one piece. And it's having one individual with the strength to say that was my brother, that's my dad, or that's my cousin, that's my neighbor, my co-worker. And I think we're one piece away, one piece. So far, officials have released 3 key pieces of evidence in the case. The photo. A grainy image of what police believe is a suspect in the slayings was captured by Libby on her smartphone as he walked along the trail, head down, toward the girls. The suspect was wearing jeans, a blue jacket, a brown hoodie and a hat. The audio. German also captured a snippet of audio on her phone of someone giving the command down the hill to the two teens. Police praised her for her foresight in capturing an image and voice that they could analyze in the search for the killer. The sketch, a composite sketch by police of a man believed to be connected to the killings, was drawn from eyewitness descriptions of the suspect seen walking along the trail the same day that Abby and Libby disappeared. On April 22, police released a revised sketch of the suspect, this one without a beard. Police said the initial sketch would become secondary. The video. At the same April press conference, police released a video of the suspect walking on the railroad bridge. Indiana State Police noted that because of the condition of the bridge, the man is not walking normally. DNA evidence also has been collected from the scene, said ISP First Sergeant Jerry Holman, the investigative commander of the Lafayette District. At every crime scene, you are going to have DNA. We are still working on identifying all of the DNA that we have there, Holman said in August 2017. Is there DNA linked to the killer? Possibly. Indiana State Police officials have not confirmed yet whether they have DNA samples that are directly tied to a possible suspect or suspects in the Delphi case. However, a change in Indiana law this year might help in the case because it now allows law enforcement officials to collect DNA samples from anyone accused of a felony. Before the new law took effect on January 1, police could only collect DNA if a person had been convicted of a crime. There is also the possibility someday that a familial DNA search, one that looks for markers in DNA that might indicate a family member, could be employed in the search for Abby's and Libby's killer. Are there any suspects? Tips flooded in after the case was featured on the Dr. Phil show in December 2017. But no suspects have been identified or arrests made in the double homicide. Police have said they are looking for a white male from 5'6" to 5'10" in height, weighing 180 to 200 pounds, with reddish-brown hair with the description based on the image from Libby's phone. Arrests of men bearing resemblances to the police sketch of the Delphi homicide suspect have caused stirs on social media and in news reports, but have not, so far, led to an arrest in the Delphi slayings. Most recently, the arrest of a Randolph County man on molesting charges on January 8, 2019, prompted new speculation about the Delphi case. The team of Delphi investigators acknowledged they received a flurry of calls connected to the arrest of Charles Andrew Eldridge, a 46-year-old Union City man. Eldridge is accused of communicating online with a person he believed to be a 13-year-old girl to arrange sex and faces charges of attempted child molesting and child solicitation. While law enforcement officials don't reveal specific actions or steps of their ongoing Delphi investigation, they did say that they were aware of Eldridge's arrest and will investigate to see if there could be any connection to the murders that occurred in Delphi, according to a news release Monday from the multi-agency team. Each tip, whether it receives media attention or not, is investigated for any connection to the Delphi case, the team said. However, it also acknowledged that many similar tips and arrests of other persons alleged to be connected to the Delphi murders occur with some frequency in and outside of Indiana. Daniel Nations, another person questioned by police in the Delphi case, has been described in the past as a person of interest but has not officially been named a suspect. There isn't enough evidence to change that, police have said. Reward. The police agencies involved announced a reward for information leading to the arrest of the person or persons responsible for the homicides of Abby and Libby. The reward has risen to $216,165, according to the state government page, which also includes information on how to donate.
Number 6.
Queen Elizabeth I granted Sir Walter Raleigh a charter to gather a small group to settle in the Chesapeake Bay as part of a larger campaign to explore and settle North America. Sir Richard Grenville led the expedition and landed on Roanoke Island in 1584. Soon after settlement, he was responsible for burning a village inhabited by Carolina Algonquians, ending the previously friendly relations. When the settlement failed due to this strained relation and the lack of resources, the first group of colonists returned to England shortly after when Sir Francis Drake offered to take them home on his way from the Caribbean. John White arrived with another group of colonists in 1587, intending to settle in the Chesapeake Bay, but the pilot of the ship brought them to Roanoke Island. His daughter Eleanor White Dare and her husband Ananias Dare were on the charter as well, and the two later had a child in Roanoke, Virginia Dare, who was the first person of English descent born in North America. White's group of settlers ran into similar difficulties as the first group. After arriving too late to begin planting, the Roanoke colonists had a poor harvest and lacked many other materials. Additionally, after an indigenous man killed one of the colonists, White ordered an attack on a group of indigenous people in a tribe nearby out of retaliation. This increased the already high tension between the Native Americans and the colonists who settled on their land. Because of these difficulties, White returned to England to ask for help with gathering resources and left behind 117 people in the colony. When White returned to Europe, England was in the midst of the Anglo-Spanish War between Queen Elizabeth I and King Philip II of Spain. Because of the war effort, there were few resources to devote to the New World. Boats, materials, and people were not available to John White, who then stayed in Europe for a few years until the conclusion of the war. When White returned to Roanoke Island in 1590, the settlement was deserted. In his own account, White describes the island upon his return. He states, "We passed toward the place where they were left in sundry houses, but we found the houses taken down, and 5 foot from the ground in fair capital letters was graven Croton without any cross or sign of distress." He later concludes that the colonists were safe with the Croton tribe because of the lack of any distress signals. However, due to inclement weather and few supplies, he never sailed to the Croton settlement. Instead, he returned to England, never knowing where his colony remained. Centuries later, researchers at the British Museum examined a map drawn by John White, the original governor of Roanoke County. The examination was conducted because a portion of the map appears to have been covered by a patch of paper. When backlit, a star shape appears under the patch, possibly noting the exact location of the colony. The site has been excavated, and archaeologists have discovered ceramic material that may have belonged to members of the lost colony, but the archaeological remains have not been definitively linked to the lost colonists. There is no conclusive evidence as to what happened to the colony of Roanoke. Theories range from the plausible to the improbable, including massacre, migration, and even a zombie outbreak. One hotly debated clue is a rock, allegedly engraved by Roanoke colonists, that was found in a swamp in North Carolina. The engraving states that 2 of the original settlers, Virginia and Ananias Dare, were murdered. For decades, the rock has been repeatedly authenticated and discredited by archaeologists and historians. Nonetheless, a popular theory maintained that the Roanoke colonists were murdered by the indigenous tribes nearby. This theory, which pushes the racist notion that indigenous people are dangerous and violent, alleges that tensions between the colonists and the nearby tribes, specifically the Croton, continued to rise, leading to the mass murder of the colony. However, the theory fails to note the violence initiated by the colonists themselves, as well as the fact that there is no evidence of the colonists leaving unexpectedly. All of the structures had been taken down, and no human remains were found at the site. Additionally, as White noted, the word Croton was etched in the tree without any symbols of distress. There are a host of paranormal theories that are based entirely in speculation and not the evidence presented by historical accounts. The Zombie Research Society, for example, theorizes that a zombie outbreak in the colony led to cannibalism, which is why no bodies were found. Once the zombies ran out of colonists to feed on, the theory goes, they themselves decomposed into the ground, leaving no evidence behind. The most likely scenario is that environmental degradation and poor harvests forced the colony to migrate elsewhere. In 1998, archaeologists studied tree rings and concluded that there was a drought within the time frame of the colonists' evacuation. This theory follows that the colonists left Roanoke Island to live with nearby tribes, e.g. the Croton, and survive the dangerous conditions.
Number 7.
How can someone go into a second-story bar and never come out? I'm talking about the disappearance of Brian Shaffer in 2006. On March 31, Shaffer and his friend William Clint Florence went out to Ugly Tuna to celebrate the beginning of spring break. Shaffer was a second-year medical student and surely wanted to cut loose a bit after a stressful week of exams. The two then barhopped down High Street towards the Arena District, reportedly taking shots at every stop. A little after midnight, Shaffer and Florence met up with a friend of Florence named Meredith, who gave them a ride back to Ugly Tuna. The three of them are seen on security camera ascending the escalator to the now-closed bar in the University Gateway around 1:15 a.m. on April 1. Later, the camera captures Shaffer outside the bar talking to 2 women around 1:50 a.m. and then re-entering the bar. At this point, Shaffer was separated from his friends. The bar was closing, and after searching and calling for Shaffer, Florence and Meredith decided to wait outside the bar for him to come out. After a while, the two left, assuming Shaffer had gone home. But the 27-year-old has never been seen or heard from since. Ugly Tuna had one entrance at the top of the escalator. Anyone entering or leaving from this would be caught on surveillance cameras. Investigators acknowledge the possibility that the cameras could have somehow missed Shaffer, though think it's unlikely. Another improbable scenario they've entertained is Shaffer disguising himself and/or hiding from the cameras before exiting the bar. After all, the quality of security cameras circa 2006 was not the highest. There was only one other way that Brian could have exited the bar that night, and it was from a back service door. Not only was this a door used exclusively by staff members, but it also opened to a construction site that would have posed a dangerous situation for a sober person, let alone someone who had been drinking all night. It's also important to note neither Shaffer's cell phone, credit cards, or bank account have been used since. The young man's disappearance sparked an international search effort. Possible sightings started flowing in from Michigan, Texas, and even as far as Sweden. Eddie Vedder, the lead singer of Pearl Jam, one of Shaffer's favorite bands and motivation for a tattoo, even took time out of the band's set in Cincinnati to put out a call for information that may lead to Shaffer's discovery. Shaffer received excellent marks from the university, was close with his family who lived in Pickerington, and had a good relationship with his girlfriend, Alexis Wagoner. He and Wagoner had a spring break trip to Miami booked, confirming plans with her over the phone around 9 p.m. on March 31. She, along with their families and friends, were convinced Shaffer would probably propose later that year or maybe even on their trip to Miami. For months after his disappearance, Wagoner called his phone every night. It went straight to voicemail every time except one night in September when she heard the phone ring 3 times. There was no answer, but the call pinged a tower in Hilliard. There was hope for the first time in months. Unfortunately, the cellular carrier divulged that the rings were likely a glitch in the system rather than Shaffer powering on his phone. Everyone in Shaffer's life agreed to take a polygraph test in order to clear them of any suspicion, except Florence. Reportedly, Florence refused the test because he felt he had told police everything he knew about the night Shaffer disappeared. By all accounts, he was the all-American boy with everything to live for, which is why his disappearance has been so troubling all these years. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of Brian Shaffer, please contact the Central Ohio Crime Stoppers at 614-645-8477. If requested, you will remain anonymous. Additional information. Prior to his disappearance, Shaffer's mother Renee died of a rare form of bone cancer called myelodysplasia. And just after his disappearance, his father died in a freak accident involving a windstorm and a tree branch. The immediate Shaffer family is survived only by Brian's younger